A century of peace. Wow, a century of peace. It almost doesn't even compute,
Right.
Like, how is that even possible? But that's what we're looking at today, isn't it?
It is.
Okay, so no poverty, no crime, not even lawyers, right? Sounds like a fantasy world.
Well, that's exactly the kind of society described in the Book of Mormon, specifically this section called the Fourth Book of Nephi, which we're going to be diving into today.
Right. Sounds wild.
We're treating this as, a historical sociological text for our purposes. And we're going to unpack this period of peace and prosperity and then, really explore how it all kind of fell apart.
Yeah, how it unraveled, how it went wrong. I mean, it's always the big question, right?
It is.
So for our listeners who maybe aren't familiar, what's the Book of Mormon all about? Give us a little background.
Sure. So like you said, it describes these two main groups, the Nephites and the Lamanites. And essentially it's chronicling, their interactions, their conflicts over centuries. You can almost think of it like two civilizations with this really long kind of intertwined history.
Lots of baggage there, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. Tons of baggage. And the Fourth Book of Nephi, where we're focusing, this picks up after this really pivotal moment for these civilizations. They've had a visit, and not just any visit, a visit from Jesus Christ himself.
Wow. Imagine the impact of that.
It's huge. You can only imagine the kind of cultural, societal, everything upheaval that comes with something like that, right?
Totally.
It's interesting, too, because the text really emphasizes this radical transformation they go through.
So it's like a complete reset button on their entire society.
Yeah, and not just a reset on a surface level. We're talking about this deep, pervasive change. The text talks about a complete conversion to Christianity.
But it sounds like it goes beyond just like religious beliefs, right?
Absolutely. This wasn't just about, going to church on Sunday. This conversion fueled a complete societal overhaul.
So walk us through this golden age, as it's called.
Yeah.
What did their day-to-day life, actually look like?
Well, the text really emphasizes these amazing changes. For starters, it wasn't just that they, stopped fighting. They actually eradicated poverty. Crime was gone. Prejudice, all the things that we grapple with today. Eradicated.
Just like that. How is that even possible?
It's really attributed to a few things, their faith being one of them, but also their commitment to shared resources. They embraced economic equality, and it transformed their entire society. Just imagine everyone living by the principles that Christ, taught.
Okay, but let's be real. That's tough to do, even for a short time, let alone for generations.
It's true.
And the Book of Nephi says this lasted for how long? Generations.
Generations. And they even talk about these incredible miracles performed by Christ's disciples, healing the sick, raising the dead, really vivid accounts, It's fascinating.
It's interesting, you think about those stories, those details. They weren't just nice stories, right? I mean, they were passed down, they shaped people's beliefs.
Exactly. These weren't just campfire stories. These were narratives that really had power that shaped behavior. But what's really remarkable is that this unity, this peace, it wasn't just a brief anomaly. It lasted for almost 200 years.
2 centuries. I mean, can you imagine growing up knowing nothing but peace and abundance? But this period of bliss, spoiler alert, it doesn't last forever. When do things start to go south?
Well, according to the Book of Nephi, around the year 200 or so, the first cracks start to show in this seemingly perfect society.
So how does a society, built on the teachings of Christ, a society that had achieved the impossible, how does it start to crumble?
It's the classic tale, honestly. A tale as old as time.
Come on, you've got to give us more than that, what happened.
Yeah.
Our listeners are on the edge of their seats.
Okay. So as we get deeper into the Fourth Book of Nephi, we start to see signs of, human nature creeping back in. And one of the first things to emerge is a familiar foe, materialism.
Materialism? Really? I mean, after achieving utopia, you'd think they'd be over that kind of thing. What do they even want? Like, I don't know, golden chariots? What are we talking about here?
Well, not quite chariots, but, the sentiment might have been similar. The text specifically mentions things like costly apparel. People start getting really into, adorning themselves with gold and silver and precious things.
Okay, so not iPhones, but, still that desire for stuff.
Exactly. It wasn't about practicality anymore. It became about status, like distinguishing yourself from your neighbor, even if that neighbor was, your equal not long ago.
Right. So the very things they worked so hard to get rid of, poverty, inequality, they start creeping back in, just in a new form.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Almost like this human desire for more, for differentiation, it's just kind of hardwired in.
Yeah, I guess you can't escape human nature forever, right?
Yeah.
But they were still incredibly devout, right? I mean, surely their faith would have been enough to, counter that urge, wouldn't it?
You would think so, right? But even the religious institutions weren't immune to this shift.
What do you mean?
Well, the book talks about how churches, once these beacons of unity and shared faith, they start getting caught up in issues of wealth and authority.
So instead of being places of, like, spiritual guidance, they become almost like, what, status symbols?
Yeah, in a way. The text even mentions people preaching for the vainness and the pride it brought them, not out of genuine devotion. It's a stark reminder, isn't it? Even in the most egalitarian environments, you can still see power structures and hierarchies emerge. And as this complacency sets in, it seems like their memory of the struggles, the struggles that actually led them to this utopia, it starts to fade.
And that's when things really start to unravel.
Exactly. By the year 230, this society that was once a model of unity, it's fractured. The Book of Nephi talks about all these new denominations popping up, some even going so far as to deny, like, the core teachings of Christ.
Wow. Talk about a full 180. They went from complete unity to, what, religious arguments and power struggles? Like, didn't they learn anything from their ancestors?
It seems history has a way of repeating itself, even when those lessons are, etched in vivid detail.
So this fracturing of their faith, I mean, that couldn't have been good for their social cohesion, right?
You're right on the money. This is where things take a turn for the worse. Remember the Nephites and the Lamanites, those two groups we talked about earlier?
Oh, right, with all the historical baggage. So they go back to fighting each other.
Kinda, but it's not that simple. See, this time it's not just about lineage, it's about their belief systems. The terms Nephite and Lamanite, they take on new meanings, they become tied to these different ideologies.
So instead of a physical war, they're now in a war of ideas.
Exactly. And as you can imagine, this ideological conflict proved to be just as destructive, if not more so, than their previous physical battles.
So this war of ideas, this clash of beliefs, it sounds pretty intense. What were the consequences, What happened to the society?
Yeah, well, the Book of Nephi, it doesn't really hold back. It tells us that by the year 244, and remember, this is just a few decades after these divisions started, wickedness did prevail upon the face of the whole land. It's pretty heavy stuff.
Wow. Wickedness prevailed. So they really went back to, like, a dark age. I mean, it sounds like they've completely regressed, almost back to that time before Christ's visit, right? Constant conflict, suffering, the whole 9 yards.
It definitely seems like that, a return to darkness. And it's not just about, individual people doing bad things. The text describes a total societal breakdown. We see these secret combinations popping up again, basically like organized crime, but with this even deeper layer of corruption.
Right, driven by greed and power, preying on anyone they can. It's like those Gadianton robbers we talked about before.
Exactly. The text makes it very clear that the Gadianton robbers aren't just common criminals, right? They represent something way more insidious, like the erosion of all those good values that once held their society together.
It's like the complete opposite of everything they had built during that golden age.
Absolutely.
So it's not just external threats then.
Yeah.
They're battling something from within, too. What about those who, really did believe? Did they manage to hold on to it amidst all this chaos?
It's a mixed bag. The text portrays them as trying to resist this downward spiral, at least initially. But even they weren't totally immune to the pull of power and wealth, You start seeing examples of pride creeping in, materialism. They even start abandoning those very principles that, ironically, had set them apart in the first place.
It's like a cautionary tale then. It makes you think even the best of us, we're not immune to that kind of temptation, especially when everyone else is giving in.
It is a cautionary tale. It reminds us that achieving a just and harmonious society, it's not a finish line you cross, it's a constant struggle.
So are we doomed to repeat these cycles? I mean, you look around at our own world today, the conflicts, the divisions. Are we just hardwired for this?
It's something to think about, for sure. This story, whether you interpret it literally or metaphorically, it offers a powerful lens, right? It reminds us that those seeds of division, they often take root during the good times, not the bad.
Because we let our guard down.
Maybe. But the point is, we have to be vigilant. We can't just assume things will stay good forever.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners today? What can we learn, not just from the failures, but also from their successes?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway from the Book of Nephi, this idea of a golden age and its eventual downfall, is that maintaining unity, real lasting unity, it takes more than just good intentions. It takes constant effort. We have to learn from the past, from our mistakes, or we're bound to repeat them. It's about being aware, paying attention, both to what's happening in the world around us
Right.
and what's happening within ourselves.
So it's like a two-pronged approach. It's about, yeah, like you said, being aware of what's going on out there in society, but also like looking inward, checking ourselves.
Yeah. Like, are we contributing to the problem, even in small ways?
Oh, that's a good question.
Are we being judgmental, gossiping, holding up to grudges?
Because those things matter.
They do,
Yeah.
because they create this fertile ground for bigger problems to take root.
Wow. So it's like this deep dive into this ancient civilization. It's really a mirror.
It is.
It's reflecting back on us, on our own lives,
Yeah.
on the choices we make every single day.
And the hope is, right, that by understanding what happened to them, we can make different choices.
Right.
We can break the cycle.
Create a better future.
Exactly. A future where peace isn't this fleeting thing.
Right. Where it's not just a moment in time.
It can be something that we build and sustain together.
It's a powerful message, especially today when, everything feels so divided, so uncertain. This ancient story, the Book of Nephi, it's a reminder that building a better world, it's an ongoing process. It takes all of us. And it starts with remembering the lessons of those who came before us, both their triumphs and their failures. So next time you see a news story about division, conflict, any of that, think back to this conversation. Think about the Book of Nephi and ask yourself, what golden age have we forgotten? And what can we do today to make sure we don't lose sight of it again?